Welcome to Soul Navigation with world-renowned psychic life coach and professional astrologer, Meredith. In the next hour, Meredith and her guests encourage you to tap into your soul's desires and begin to take down the barriers that stand between you and your intended destiny. Here's your host, Meredith.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Soul Navigation with Meredith Bromke. I am Meredith, your psychic life coach, professional astrologer, and host. Every week, I hope to help you better understand your life purpose and your soul's contract in this lifetime by bringing you a wealth of information that is rare, unique, and hopefully life-changing. Please feel free to explore more of my work at teamsoulnavigation.com. Now, get ready for an exploration like never before, and let's start our journey. Today, we have an awe-inspiring, thought-provoking show for you. It's called Journey of Souls, Studying Life Between Lifetimes with famed author and renowned master hypnotherapist, Dr. Michael Newton. There's a lot to say about this man, but let me just share a little bit with you. Dr. Michael Newton is a pioneer in uncovering the mysteries about life after death through the use of spiritual hypnotic regression. He holds a doctorate in counseling psychology, is a certified master hypnotherapist, and has developed his own intensive regression techniques in order to take his subjects beyond their past life memories and into the place where the soul lives in between lifetimes. Dr. Newton is a best-selling author of 3 books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, and his most recent book, Life Between Lives. His books have sold over 500,000 copies, and if you have not read his work, don't waste another minute. Go run out after the show and get yourself a copy today. They are also translated, I believe, in 25 different languages. His work will truly change your life. Dr. Michael Newton has expanded his work and is the founder of the Newton Institute, where he teaches hypnotherapists his own techniques and methods used to guide his clients into the spirit world in between incarnations. If you would like to see if there is a professional hypnotherapist who has been formally trained by Dr. Newton and has mastered his techniques, check out his website at newtoninstitute.org. In 1998, I want to mention Dr. Newton was honored for his years of soul memory research and clinical discoveries regarding our afterlife. His contributions are highly revered and respected around the world, and I am honored to welcome you to my show, Dr. Michael Newton.
Well, thanks for having me, Meredith. It's wonderful to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're also excited to learn more. I first became of your work through your book, Journey of Souls, which I absolutely loved, about 7 years ago. And the most important gift your work has given me was a sense of peace, contentment, and revelation. And I think in an odd way it prepared me for my own death and gave me a comfort around leaving this lifetime that I never previously had. I'm sure you hear that all the time, don't you?
I do, Meredith. And, of course, I wrote the book essentially after making my discoveries and researching them for so many years because there are so many people who are unhappy with what they see around them. They don't see any purpose to life. They wonder who they are, where did they come from, why are they here, and where they're going. And I think in all the years and the thousands of cases that I had, it was the consistency of the reports that really hooked me into doing this kind of research and continuing with it and finally writing my first book about it. And the marvelous thing, Meredith, is that all this information is in everyone's head, and all it needs is a skilled hypnosis professional to bring it out. And this is the wonderful aspect, I think, of the whole field of uncovering soul memories, is the idea that I think one of our greatest fears, and I'm sure you've thought about that, is the dread of death. And even more than the fear of a painful death is the conception by many people, whether they be deeply religious or just atheists, and all philosophical persuasions in between. They just don't have that inner knowing. And so they're fearful of the nothingness of death. In other words, the loss of their personhood.
Right. Many have asked you if a subject is just dreaming or hallucinating when they're in that state of hypnosis. And I like how you talked about cross-referencing many of your subjects' experiences and how, while they didn't know each other, they tell of similar experiences using even the same words and graphic descriptions, describing their lives as souls. Was that mind-boggling to you at the time?
It is mind-boggling. And you know, the beauty of all this was all those years I worked with people who didn't know each other. I hadn't written a word. In fact, Meredith, I stayed away from metaphysical conventions, and really my colleagues later were a little upset with me because I was so close-mouthed about this. But I didn't want my findings to be biased, and so I wanted to just work alone. But what was interesting is that once I began to write the books and later to train other hypnotherapists in my techniques, people who have never heard of me or read my books had the same things to say. And they told, I mean, there were some variations and nuances, but essentially the same things about what it is like to cross over immediately after death, who comes to meet us, where do we go, how do we decide on our next body, and so forth. And so these are the things I write about.
Right. And in your book, you did talk about how early in your career you actually resisted doing this past life regression work, thinking that it was unorthodox, and your subject sort of led you into it, and then you revealed how you found many books on past lives, but none on the subject of the life as the soul.
That's true, and we're now going back to the late 60s, early 70s, and in the beginning, I did resist, and I just to show you how old I am, Meredith, I don't like to reveal this too often, but I will to you. I began in 1956.
Really?
Which was the year of the famous Bridie Murphy case. And, of course, people were going crazy reading about this case of this Colorado housewife who recalled her past life in Ireland. Now, this is pretty tame stuff today, but in 1956, it was sensational. People would call me and say, we know you're a hypnotherapist and so forth, and I basically in those days, Meredith, worked with childhood regression, issues of trauma and so forth, and a whole lot of other things where hypnosis was used clinically in a very traditional way. So I would tell these folks, well, I'm sorry, I don't do that sort of thing. I was very imperious. I'm a traditional therapist, and you're going to have to find one of these metaphysical people to help you with your past lives. And then in my books, I described how I came kicking and screaming into the past life movement with this man who called me and needed help, and he didn't ask for a past life, but that's where we went.
Right.
And I think, though, that I need to mention that a few more years went by before that first great revelation of my first spirit world case, and this is what really changed my life, Meredith. I'll just mention that what I had here was a middle-aged woman who came to me with a presenting problem that really centered around her feelings of isolation and loneliness and a kind of disassociation with humanity, if I can put it that way. And she felt this kind of terrible yearning to be with her old friends, was the way she described it. And she claimed to have seen them in dreams. I thought I was dealing with a lady here with classical depression issues and so forth. I wasn't even sure that a past life regression would be appropriate because I was still then doing a lot of traditional work. So I worked with this lady for a while, and during the early stages of her session, I said, well, are these missing friends people you knew at any time in your current life as an adult? No. And then I took her into her childhood. Again, are these missing friends anywhere in your life today? I took her down to age 12 and 7 and so forth. No. I said, they're not missing childhood playmates? No. So then we began to explore a number of past lives, and a few of these dear friends began to crop up, and not many at all. But she kept telling me she wanted to see them all together. So by this time, I was getting kind of frustrated. So I'll tell you, I very simply said to her, was there ever in a time in your existence when you were not lonely because you were with your group of friends? And that was the trigger when I mentioned group. She smiled and began to get a little tearful and said yes, and then pointed to my office wall, and she said, and there they all are. And so what had happened, Meredith, this woman had gone very deep very quickly, and she was getting ahead of me. And that's the secret of what I do and what I train people to do, is the depth of hypnosis is so important. And what had happened in this case was that this woman was now seeing her spirit group between lives.
Right.
And that's what really changed my life, because after she left, I had these kind of cold chills.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, did your head spin around?
Yeah, I said, this can't be happening to me. and I'm not the person for this sort of thing.
Right, and that's where you kind of resisted it. But was this, is this your life contract, Dr. Newton? Did you choose this?
Well, let me just say this. I know that when I was very young, I think I was 11 or 12 years old, I knew I had something very, very important to do that would relate to spirituality. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, I really resisted these messages because I was not a religious person. I'm not a religious person today. I hope I'm spiritual, but I'm not in the traditional mold of someone who is a deeply fundamental. I'm not in that category at all philosophically. So I guess as the years went on and I began exploring, philosophy, psychology, history, and began looking at, clinical psychology, of course, I just, wondered where I belonged. And, I think my wife, who is my real advanced soul in this family, who I've been with over 50 years, just told me, it'll come when it's supposed to come. And it will unfold in the way it is supposed to unfold. And she was right. Mm-hmm. And so it came to me slowly, Meredith. I started with this woman, for example, my first spirit world case, and from there I became obsessed with this, and eventually I closed my practice to all other types of therapy except life between lives therapy. And what I found was, and this is what I think is the central core of my work, that each of us has two identities. We have a soul that is immortal with an immortal character, and we are combined temporarily with a brain that has, of course, its own emotional temperament, central nervous system, and so forth. And those two egos combine to make one personality in one lifetime. And it is the duality of who we are that is confusing to so many people. They look in the mirror in the morning and say, who is this person? Why am I me? And what happens is that when that person taps in to their unconscious mind, all this information, when properly facilitated, can unfold. And I'm not saying there aren't other ways. I mean, certainly for many, many years, I have engaged in deep meditation. I get a lot from that. There are other people that use different modalities other than hypnosis, but I am very prejudiced towards hypnosis because I know that in a 3 or 4 hour session, you can gain so much information about the things we've talked about.
I would like to ask you some simple questions.
Sure.
I wanted to know, the simplest of questions, but it also might be the broadest. What does it feel like to die, and where do we go? What does it look like in the in-between state? Can you talk about that?
Sure, you bet I can. Well, what happens at the moment of death depends on the advancement of the particular soul we're talking about. I think this is the first thing that people need to understand, that there are souls who have been around for thousands and thousands of years and others that are relatively new. And so if a relatively new soul has just died, often they don't leave Earth's astral plane right away. They want to spend time at their funerals. They want to see if Mabel brought flowers, that perhaps they want to just be around that place where they died, because it's still new to them, the idea of coming to Earth and dying and crossing over and being reborn again. The soul that's a little more advanced is one that generally leaves right away. They often will be met by spirit guides at the gate, and of course this happens to all souls, but the younger ones might still be in, I don't want to call it a state of shock, but they just want to linger more than the older souls. A lot of times the older soul will say, oh, great, I'm free again. I'm on my way home.
Right.
Whereas the younger ones tend to, I don't know, for want of a better word, dawdle a little bit and maybe attend their funeral and so forth. All souls, however, are interested in comforting the loved ones they've left behind, Meredith. And this is very important because while souls who cross over can reach back and comfort loved ones, quite often it's done immediately after death if the person hasn't been grieving so much that their mind is closed. In my second book, Destiny of Souls, I devote an entire chapter, I think it's chapter 2, to how souls reach back and comfort the loved ones they've left behind. There are all sorts of different ways. Now, what happens then is that it's kind of important to understand that at the moment of death, the soul is not exactly human anymore in the way we consider the emotional makeup of the physical brain tied to, a central nervous system. And I think that's understandable. I mean, we're dealing now with intelligent energy, and so when I'm asked, are souls really sad about dying, I think sadness is not the word to use here, because while some are elated that they're going home again, others may appear to be slightly confused or not certain, for example, of just where they are at that particular moment. It doesn't take long for them to quickly understand what's happened to them. But the difference, too, here in death, Meredith, also there's something else that comes into play, and that is, if this person was a young person who, say, was murdered or killed in an auto accident or died on an operating room table, there is less inclination to leave right away than with the soul who has reached old age and has quietly slipped away. So there are a number of variables, but essentially your question centers around what happens then when they begin to move away. Well, once a soul moves away from its body, its former surroundings on Earth begin to recede, and it's almost as if they're traveling up into the sky. I mean, that's how the way it's reported.
You also described it as a tunnel effect.
Yeah, and then they can come to a kind of tunnel effect where they seem to pass through a portal. Now, I have to say this, Meredith, there are very advanced souls who seem to whiz by so fast on their way back home that they passed right by they don't experience a tunnel effect. They don't even sense any light or darkness around them. They're moving so fast. It's kind of like everyone's in a time vortex here.
And now, you go at your own pace. You can go slow or fast.
You can. And, we've read reports from NDEs who near-death experienced people who are clinically dead for a couple of minutes and then come back to tell us about it. They talk about bright lights and tunnels and spirits coming towards them, perhaps in some cases. And very oftentimes, this is the sort of thing you'll hear from a client describing a death after a former life. Now, remember, Meredith, I'm not hearing about a death that's happening now because these folks are in my office perfectly healthy. They're talking about deaths after former lives, particularly their most immediate past life, which is fresher as far as memories. So anyway, they describe they're floating, being pulled through kind of layers of space or cloud-like substances. They, oddly enough, don't usually see any beings at the beginning except their spirit guide, although sometimes a favorite aunt who passed over earlier or a parent might come to meet them. But typically, they go to a place which I call orientation in the beginning. And this is for the average soul, where their guides will sit in a beautiful setting that's created from the unconscious mind. It might look like a garden with swans and marble benches and weeping willows, but of course these are just earthly images that are being transmitted as a function of what's going on. I mean, we know there are no gardens in the sky, but The important thing is that people describe functionally what's happening to them, and they will often use garden settings.
Will it be my own perception of beauty? If I'm Japanese, it might be a Japanese garden.
Absolutely.
Or an English garden.
Absolutely. Okay. Or if you're going to a place to study and reflect, it may look like a library.
Right.
If you're going to meet other spiritual beings, you may go to what looks like a temple. So, you just functionally think of what these earthly images mean, and you soon learn why it is they're using those names. But what happens, I think, that firstly, after a client sees their guide in their mind, this is an immortal, beloved teacher who's been with them since their creation. A lot of clients break down in my office. I have a big box of Kleenex, and believe me, I need it. Because, some people may say, for instance, religious people, they might say, oh, I see Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, when in fact, I won't dissuade their remarks on this score. I will simply say to them, well, that's wonderful. Let's move a little closer, and I want you to tell me more about it. I like to keep my questions, open-ended, and I don't want to lead the client, if you know what I mean.
Right. You're very good at that in your case studies.
So what they will say is, oh, I don't see Jesus. This is my, personal guide. This is my personal teacher. And I think what's important here, Meredith, is to understand that each of us does have a personal teacher. And the souls that are in our soul groups have the same teacher. And, this sometimes is a being who will, like in my case, lets me fall into deep holes and I have to crawl out myself, while others, are a different type. They will take you by the hand, and they're very hands-on. And so, all of our teachers are different, just like teachers in school. But I think what's interesting is that for the average client, seeing and connecting with this wonderful immortal being, where they can relate to it consciously, and let's face it, the conscious mind is not asleep, or otherwise we wouldn't be getting reports, has a great empowerment effect on the client.
Do we recognize this teacher like it's a long-lost friend, or no?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
This is what's so wonderful. They recognize the teacher as soon as they get up close in their mind, and all of these memories come flooding back of this being who, as I say, have been with them since we were created.
But why can't I know this teacher on Earth?
Oh, this is the big question. But amnesia is very frustrating to people because some people have more of it than others. And sometimes it can appear in the form of a block if you're not old enough yet to receive certain information. That's why I never took anyone under 25. The thing about amnesia is that we are given this, in a way, it's given to us out of love. This idea of a block over all our immortal life in between, and other lives we've lived. The thing about it is there are so many of us that have karmic issues from past lives that were very troubling, and maybe we're even repeating the same mistakes. And so the powers that be up there just don't feel that we need to be programmed with our past mistakes, and so they shut it down by putting these amnesic blocks in place. Now, for the average person, that's fine as far as those kinds of things when they're young. And I just at the break was mentioning that when I really began a serious practice with this, I found that a lot of people in their 20s were simply not ready for the information, and so a lot of things were blocked. But as time goes on, that block begins to lessen. The other side of it is that we need, I think, to know more about who we are in a very complex world that today is more crowded than it ever has been in the past.
Right.
I have some theories about why we're given this information in this particular era in our existence, and I honestly feel that drugs has a part of it because, Meredith, there are so many people today that are zonked out on all sorts of different kinds of drugs that the soul mind is almost clouded. It's blocked from doing the work through the brain it came here to do. And I think that there may be an aspect of amnesia that the blocks are lessening a little bit in general because of this, of the nature of our overcrowded planet and the fact that we are such a troubled people. That may be part of it. But I do know this, that while we all have certain amnesic blocks, there are other things that are not blocked. And so what we're supposed to know, we will know, that will be given to us. And I think this is the interesting aspect of amnesia. It is different for every person, and it's different for the same person depending on their age.
Right. We have a caller online, and I would like to invite you to take her question. Are you in a space where you'd like to do that?
Sure.
Okay, great. This is Carrie from the Seattle area. Carrie, you're with me, Meredith, and Dr. Michael Newton. Welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Did you have a question for him?
I do have a question. I'm wondering, in the context of either being a new soul or an old soul, I'm wondering what your belief is on how a soul comes to be, like, in essence, how a new soul is created. I mean...
Oh, Carrie, aren't you sweet? You're asking me to play God.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Somebody has to. Might as well be you.
Okay. Carrie, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but, I'm just not advanced enough to be given that information.
Really?
I'm still incarnating here on Earth. Now, if you were talking to a spirit guide who doesn't incarnate anymore or some other elder in the spirit world, they'd be able to tell you. It's a marvelous process, and the people I talk to, remember, are people who are still incarnating, just like me, or I wouldn't be able to talk to them. And what they simply say is that all of a sudden, I knew I was a person or a being or an entity, however they choose to describe it, and I'm with a group of others, and we all seem to be very young. So although, I give a little inkling of creation with regard to nurturing mother souls, if I can call it that, in my second book, really that very esoteric, marvelous process of creation itself, I honestly cannot tell you about. I'm just not advanced enough.
You talked about, you have a chapter on the beginner soul, and you wrote extensively about souls that are in their early stages of development.
Right.
And I like how you mentioned that you learned through your work approximately 42% of souls are at level 1, and only 1% of souls are at the highest level, level 5, leaving just a few 100,000 people on Earth at this level 5, and I wanted to know, who are some level 5 souls?
Well, it's usually not the world leaders or people that you see in the newspapers every day.
Yeah, is it Mother Teresa? Would she be a level 5?
Yeah, Mother Teresa would probably be in that. I've never placed her in hypnosis, but there's no doubt in my mind that she would be
Dalai Lama.
And perhaps, Gandhi. Those figures, interestingly enough, are a little skewed because after that first book came out, I began getting more advanced people because they began reading about me and thinking that they could help contribute and so forth, which they have. So the figures probably I should maybe change them a little bit to show that there seems to be a higher percentage of more advanced souls than what I originally thought. But, I don't think I was too far off with those figures.
Can we know if we're an old soul or a young soul?
Well, yes. You can go into hypnosis and find out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie from Seattle. We really appreciate your call.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Carrie. So anyhow, Meredith, that's the thing about it. I am not in a position to tell people you're old or young or anything else. What I do in my books is I try to allow the person all the self-discovery that they can muster to explain to me where they are in the scheme of things. I don't ask them, are you a young or old soul? But I can soon learn, and so can they, by the descriptions of what they do between lives, their color of their energy. There are all sorts of ways in which you can tell a young or an old soul. I have a favorite story I love to tell about my own bias at times. And when I get to the point where, or at least when I was practicing, I thought that there aren't any more advanced souls left, and I seem to be getting all beginners or maybe intermediates. And I had this lady named Harriet come to see me. Now, Harriet showed up, in a pickup truck, and she was wearing kind of a frumpy house dress, and she had her hair all piled in different directions. She was just a very Mother Earth type person, and she was a truck stop waitress in Barstow, California, which is a crossroads desert community where truckers come in and they have a little to eat, have some coffee, and then leave and continue on. And Harriet worked in there, and she worked all night and generally, and she'd put her arm around these truckers who would come in kind of sad or morose or kind of down about their lives, and she would just talk to them. And Harriet heard me on an all-night radio show and decided to come and see me to see if she could do something for me. But when she walked in, I didn't realize that. I figured, well, okay, here's another beginner soul who needs a little help. Yeah. And boy, she gave me a hug, and that energy just sent me through the roof. And so we sat down, and I soon found that this was one of the most advanced souls I'd ever worked with.
Really?
And so, they're out there. In this case, Harriet is kind of like a watcher. I mean, she doesn't need to come back to reincarnate anymore, but she comes back to help people.
Right.
So, I certainly am very humbled by what I find, Meredith, and I think that's the important thing I try to bring to my students is don't ever get on a power trip, because it's not about that. You are nothing more than a messenger. And frankly, I feel very gifted to have been allowed to be a messenger. I mean, you couldn't find a more unworthy person than me to give this message. And I'm just amazed that I've been a person who is allowed to do this and to write my books and help people with this. And so,
do we choose our next lifetime in between our lives, or do I already know what I'm going to be in my next lifetime? Is it already planned?
We don't.
Talk about free will and destiny.
Yeah, the thing is, we do have free will.
And life selection and how all that works together.
Well, when you are ready to reincarnate into another life, and let's face it, Meredith, there are people who do take a lot of time between lives. I mean, you can sit on the bench for 1,000 years up there before reincarnating if you've had a series of very hard lives. Or you can turn around in a couple of years and be back in a new body.
Is that my choice when I get there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're helped with this choice by your teacher.
Okay.
And by all that your teacher shows you between lives, and all of your own studies, and all of your work with your soulmates. And then I describe what it's like to go through in front of a group of even wiser beings, who I call the elders, for want of a better word, because that's what my clients tell me they call them. Or they can call them the sacred ones, or the wise ones, or the holy ones, anything of that nature. But they decide, with your help, when you and they feel it's ready to, you're ready to incarnate again. So you go to a place that I kind of call life selection. And basically what it is, it's once again using earthly terms to describe spiritual functions. It kind of appears like a dome-like structure, and I describe this in my books. And we see, future possibilities and probabilities, and we see generally a number of bodies that we can select from. Now, usually there's one major candidate, and most of my clients seem to know that particular candidate will be. A lot of times it's a harder life than maybe a couple of the other body choices, and so the people who are working with us, the beings that are helping us, they want us to have a choice between easy or intermediately hard or very difficult lives. They want us to make this choice.
Does my soul grow faster if I choose the harder course?
Oh, you bet it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I might just need a break.
You might need a break. You might even need to sit out a few lives. And it's a marvelous system once you've studied. It's like a huge jigsaw puzzle. And I spent years trying to put it together, and I've still only scratched the surface. Do
I always incarnate with the same soul pod?
Not necessarily. You have your own group of souls. If you want to call them a pod, that's fine. I call them a primary spirit group. It could be anywhere from 3 to 25 souls. But you have primary soulmates and companion souls But there's also a group that I call the affiliated souls who come from other soul groups around yours, and they can number up to 1,000.
Oh.
And you might incarnate in a life with a couple of those souls for specific karmic reasons.
Right, and I wanted to know about karma. Do I go into a life review and see the pain that I've created in others in my lifetime? Is that part of my...
Yes, but it's done gently.
Ah.
It is not intended to shock or shame you. Or
I'm not flogged.
No, you're not flogged. and so much of our religious history is about pain and punishment that I just cringe when I hear this, because the spirit world is a place of love and forgiveness. And after all, we're very faulty beings and we make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so when we're taken to places by our own volition, like places like a classroom or a library or a quiet place of solitude to study, very oftentimes it might look like a TV screen where you review past lives, or you have some way in which all of these images come to you and you review them. You can see where you've made your mistakes. We're hardest on ourselves. We're far harder on ourselves, Meredith, than any advanced being in the spirit world. And we, talk to our teachers about this and what we can do to maybe correct things and what kind of body would help us the best. And so, we have a lot of things to think about, both before, in the middle, and at the time when we really need to decide to come back. And
so I have the opportunity to correct my mistakes by choosing the next lifetime.
You do. Or it may be a few lives down the road.
Or a few lives down the road.
That's
Thank
right.
you. I wanted to ask you just a couple more little questions here.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about life selection. I wanted to talk to you about when a mother is expecting a child. You talk about the soul entering that baby's body at different times and kind of going in and out even.
That's right. The typical case that I found over all these years and so many thousands of clients is that I have never found a soul that has entered the fetus before the 4th month. The brain is just not developed enough, and there's not enough, therefore, to work with. Now, that doesn't mean that the soul is not nearby, looking at the mother, looking at the child that's developing, maybe sending out energy waves or what have you. But the actual conjunction is a very complex thing. I describe this in my books, Meredith, how when a soul enters the mind of a baby that's developing anywhere from the 4th to the 9th month, they work with the brain of that child in the sense of connecting with the neurotransmitters and working through all the electrical circuits. And it's not like an alien invasion. Some people have the wrong impression of
right.
it. The child feels like a companion is joining them. And I need to bring out something that we didn't get to when we talked about life selection that pertains to what I call the womb experience. And that is this. Souls combine with the brain for different reasons. Now, we might find a soul who is on their karmic cycle, combating the need to control others or perhaps fighting indulgence or whatever. They may be working in conjunction with a brain disposed to being a little bit aggressive, perhaps, or inclined towards self-gratification. This mixture of soul self and biological self could be volatile, and we have volatile people in this world. Now, you have a situation there where there's a conjunction at work. Now, on the other hand, souls who are beginning to attach to a new brain before the birth of that child may want to work in opposition to the brain of that child in order to gain from the association. And I find this is more common. And let me just give you a quick example, Meredith.
Okay.
A low-energy passive soul might want to be with a highly emotional, restless brain in order to combat a natural inclination, well, we'll say towards being fearful or not taking risks. So here you have a push-me-pull-you force. And all this is unfolding during those 4 to 9 months when the child is developing in the mother's womb. It's fascinating to study this. And of course, remember at the top of the show we talked about how people can look in a mirror and wonder why they are who they are?
Right.
I think that these two egos are perhaps not understanding each other in life, and they're not working together in harmony. And one of the great psychological things we can do for people is to make them aware of who their soul really is in connection with the brain that they're occupying in this lifetime. So that's one of the real, I think, important aspects of working in the womb.
You also say that birth is actually much more traumatic for the soul than death.
Oh, absolutely. Just imagine being in a hospital room with bright lights and a doctor pulling you out and slapping you on the behind, and suddenly, from that comfort, warmth and darkness and inside the mother's womb, you're brought into this very troubled world.
And do we choose that exact moment when we want to enter?
When we want to enter?
The world.
For the first time? Oh, yeah.
And you also say that the soul, the baby, the soul is working up courage to come.
Well, with some souls. The others, no, they can't wait to be born. and there are others who are passive that don't care one way or the other.
Really? You get everything.
Yeah, you get all spectrums here.
Dr. Newton, we have to come to the close of our show, and I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor to learn about your discoveries in more depth, and we're all very fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from you.
Well, thank you for having me, Meredith.
Oh, thank you. The hour goes by so fast, and we really appreciate it, and I encourage everyone to go out, dash out, and find your books. For my listeners, I invite you again to visit Dr. Newton's website, newtoninstitute.org, and to purchase his books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, and Life Between Lives. They will no doubt change your life. Would you like to close with a thought, Dr. Newton?
Well, I just would like everybody to know that nothing happens by accident and that they're here for a purpose. And the thing is, we may fall down at times, but pick yourself up and keep working. Know that there are people on the other side who care about you, who want you to succeed, and that it's all going to work. The laundry will all be worked out. I mean, eventually you're going to get it. You may not do all the things that you hoped you could do when you came into this life, but you're going to get a second chance.
Right. And I found you wrote, I took solace in your words, people are not really gone as long as they are remembered by those left on earth.
Very true.
I loved that, and I also loved how you wrote, I took a lot of comfort in your writing, these departed souls are still able to reach us if called upon.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for being here with me today. Your host, Meredith, with Soul Navigation. Tune in same time next Wednesday on the Seventh Wave Network for another incredible show. Thank you, Dr. Newton.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you for listening to Soul Navigation. To contact Meredith or set up a private reading, visit soulnavigation.com. Tune in next Wednesday for another thought-provoking and entertaining hour on Soul Navigation with Meredith.